Great. Welcome everyone. Good evening and good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Anam Hamid from Maple Assist, and today we are bringing you a very highly anticipated webinar, which will, cover COVID-19 and its impact on international students. Of course, we know that there have been a lot of changes taking place because of the COVID and during this pandemic as well. And, so today we have not one but two representatives from the IRCC, which is the Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada body, which is a part of the government of Canada. We have them joining us. We have Miss Jaquie MacLean and Mr. Shikhir Gupta, both joining us from India and Canada. And they will be here to help you in navigating through all of these changes. Welcome, Jaquie and Shikhir.
Thanks, Anam. Thanks.
Great. So a couple of house rules before we begin in earnest. So we will begin with a presentation that Shikhir will be talking us through. And do listen in. You have a Q&A at the bottom of your screens. I encourage you to share your questions over there, but listen to the presentation because some of your questions may just be answered. And following that, Jaquie will take us through a couple of frequently asked questions. She may also take up some of the Q&A questions that you share with us. Feel free to share your questions. And I think I'll, pass it on to you now, Shikhir. Shall I begin the presentation?
Thanks, Anam. Thanks a lot. Just before I begin, could you please confirm if my voice is audible?
Yes, we can hear you well.
All right, thank you. So very good evening, everyone. And to begin with, I would like to thank Maple Assist to invite us to this webinar on study permit processing during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Shikhir Gupta, and I'm the Outreach Officer at the Consulate General of Canada in Chandigarh. The target audience for this webinar are students from India who are interested in pursuing a Canadian post-secondary education. Before we begin, please note that the contents of this webinar are valid only as of today. For the most current information on IRCC processes and travel restrictions to Canada, please visit our website www.canada.ca/immigration. We realize that international students make significant cultural and social contributions to Canada. They also generate more than $21 billion in economic activity. Since the onset of the pandemic, IRCC has implemented a number of temporary policy changes to support and reassure international students and designated learning institutions. The fall 2020 semester has by far the largest student intake throughout the academic year, and this is fast approaching. The most recently implemented measures were introduced on July 14th and are aimed at this upcoming cohort. The changes will continue Canada's reputation as a premier destination for international students, and they will demonstrate the importance of international student program and the contributions international students make to Canada. We strongly encourage students to still consider studying at Canadian institutions, even if many DLIs have moved their fall 2020 semester to an online format. So moving on, our agenda for today will cover the following topics. So the first is that why should you consider studying in Canada? Second, we'll cover how the application process works. Third, are the restrictions to travel to Canada. Fourth, are the exemptions to those travel restrictions. Fifth, are the processing changes due to COVID-19, which include a two-step review process, student direct stream, eligibility to work, authorized leave during studies, impact on the postgraduate work permit program. Sixth, we'll cover some fraud tips, and last but not the least, what you need to know before traveling to Canada. We will end the presentation with a question and answer session. You can use the Q&A box to send us your questions, and we will go through them after the presentation. Moving on. Before we get started on some of the changes put in place, let's focus on why you should study in Canada. First is world-renowned qualifications. Canada is recognized worldwide for our outstanding quality of education institutes. Our educators are highly trained and bring diverse perspectives to the classroom. At the university level, 2 out of every 5 academics hold at least one international degree, and we have 11 of the top 250 universities worldwide. Second is affordable education. Canada is known for having some of the lowest university tuition fee among English-speaking countries. Whatever your budget may be, you'll find something just right for you in our diverse range of education options. Third is safe and multicultural communities. We are proud to say that the warm and friendly stereotype about Canadians is true. When you come to Canada, you will find a welcoming country with a unique Canadian culture that embraces diversity. And last but not the least is a path to a promising future. Canadian colleges and university graduates come with a very, very strong earning potential. Moving on to the next slide. To protect Canadians from the outbreak of COVID-19, the Government of Canada implemented travel restrictions that limit travel to Canada. Until further notice, most foreign nationals cannot travel to Canada, even if they have a valid visitor visa or an electronic travel authorization. These restrictions stop non-essential or non-discretionary travel to Canada. In the next slide, we will look at travel restriction exemptions for students in a little more detail. Not all students will be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. To be exempt, you must be in possession of either a study permit issued on or before March 18, 2020, or a port of entry letter of introduction which indicates your study permit was approved on or before March 18, 2020. Equally as important, you must also be able to demonstrate that it is essential for you to travel to Canada. For example, if you have in-person classes or you are already in the middle of your program of study and need to return to it. You can demonstrate this by providing a recently dated letter from your DLI that explains why you physically need to be in Canada for the fall semester. These documents must be provided to the airline at the time of boarding and to CBSA once you reach a port of entry in Canada. Failure to do this may result in denied boarding for your flight or being forced to return from Canada at your own expense. We will not provide any travel authorization letters for students. All you need to travel is your visa or port of entry introduction letter and evidence that your essential need to travel. It is very important to note that you should not travel to Canada until at most 3 weeks before the start date of your class, for which your physical presence in Canada is required. For those who have already been issued visas for a previous semester but were not able to travel to Canada to attend, please send us a copy of your new letter of acceptance and advise us of your new start date. You can send these documents to us via the web form. In the next slide, we'll look at what processing changes have been introduced as a result of the pandemic. Visa application centers, also known as VACs, are currently closed. This means we are unable to accept any paper application submissions. As such, only online submissions are being accepted. On the IRCC website, we normally publish processing times for each of our missions for all our lines of business. Please note that these processing times are no longer accurate, as there are processing delays due to reduced staff at the mission. That being said, IRCC is working very hard to process all visa applications in time for the fall 2020 semester. To do this, we need your help by submitting your application as early as possible and submitting all of the required documents as soon as possible. We are aware of many service disruptions that are causing delays in submitting a complete application. For example, we know that VACs remain closed. This means that there is no mechanism to submit biometrics at this time. We also know that panel physicians are operating at limited capacity. This means that it may take longer for you to obtain an appointment to complete your immigration medical exam. We also know that some businesses and schools remain closed or are operating at limited capacity. This means that it may take longer for you to obtain the supporting document you need for your application. All of that being said, we will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents at this time. This means you do not have to worry about the deadline specified in the request letters sent to you. However, note that we will not be able to complete the processing of your application until all required and requested documents have been received. So it is in your favor to submit these documents to us as soon as possible. The exceptions to this are the three following documents. You must provide them upfront or your application may be refused. First is the application forms. You do not have an application unless you complete the IRCC forms required. Second is the fee. This includes both the study permit processing fee and the biometrics fee. Third is the letter of acceptance, also known as the LOA, from a designated learning institute in Canada. This is mandatory for you to submit with your application. Please note that we cannot physically issue any visas until the WACs reopen because we have no mechanism for two-way transmission of passport between you, the client, and us, the visa office. We are, however, attempting to return passports for any existing paper files at the mission, as we realize this is an important identity document for you. Any documents mailed directly to the mission will be returned to the sender, so please do not attempt to send your passports directly to us. Please wait for the WACs to reopen. So moving on to the next slide. As I previously indicated that only those visas issued on or before March 18th may travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. The recently introduced measures address applications which have not yet received approval as of March 18. Here are those measures. If your program of study will qualify you for a postgraduate work permit, also known as PGWP, a part of your course, that is the fall 2020 semester, has been moved on to an online format because of the pandemic. The time spent on the online portion while outside of Canada will still count towards the time on your PGWP. However, the online portion must be 50% or less of your entire program of study. This means you will still need to complete a minimum half of your program in Canada for all that time to count towards your PGWP. Second is that online study applications will be prioritized. A two-stage approval process will provide some breathing room for students who are not yet able to provide biometrics or medicals. The first stage is the approval in principle, also known as AIP. This is essentially the eligibility assessment of your application. If you receive an AIP approval, your online course time will count towards time for your PGWP. This means you do not have to wait for a visa to be issued. Stage 2 refers to admissibility and final decisions on your application. In cases of approval, this results in visa issuance. Please also note that an AIP approval is not a guarantee of a visa. Stage 2 includes admissibility decisions. For example, you may be refused a visa despite having an AIP because you have failed your medical exam. So moving on. This chart explains the process from start to entering Canada. Prior to applying for your study permit, you should carefully research designated learning institutions, decide if you are traveling alone, prepare a budget and proof of funds, gather important documents. If you want assistance regarding the study permit process, please ensure you seek the help of a certified immigration representative. After you receive your letter of acceptance, you can apply for a study permit. This is where the process has changed a bit and where your decision-making process is broken up into two stages. As well, even after being issued a visa, you may still not be able to enter Canada if you are not exempt from the travel restrictions. As you can see, the assessment of your application will be broken into two stages. Based on the current travel restrictions, even if you're issued a visa, you still will not be able to enter Canada unless you fall under an exemption. Moving on to the next slide. The AIP refers to applications which have not yet received a final decision as of March 18. It refers to the eligibility assessment of your application. Essentially, it means that even though you're still missing medicals or biometrics, you may still be able to receive an AIP on your application. The criteria for this assessment has not changed, neither the requirements nor how an officer makes the assessment. Here are the criteria. First is that you're a genuine student. This means you have demonstrated the academics and language capability through the submission of your previous academic transcripts and IELTS or TOEFL scores that you're able and qualified to complete a program of study in Canada. Second is that you have been accepted by a DLI in Canada. This means you have submitted a valid letter of acceptance from a DLI in Canada. Third is that you have sufficient funds to pay for your studies, living expenses, and transportation without working. This means you have submitted financial evidence of liquid funds to pay for these three things for the first year of school and demonstrated why explanation and proof of how you intend to pay these three things, that is tuition, transportation, and living expenses for all of the remaining years of studies. Fourth is that you will leave Canada by the end of your authorized stay. This means you have demonstrated through evidence and explanation what your ties are to your home country, which will motivate you to leave Canada once your visa expires. Once you receive an AIP in your application, a letter will be sent to you electronically to relay this information to you. You may also receive requests for biometrics and medicals if you have not yet submitted them. So in the next slide, we'll be providing you with a list of basic documents required to receive an AIP for the SDS and non-SDS stream. Let's look at the SDS list of mandatory documents for the AIP. First, you need a valid LOA from a DLI in Canada. Second is that you need to provide IELTS test results demonstrating 6 in each band. Only in-person test results will be accepted. We are not accepting online test results. Third, you need to show a receipt or documentation from the DLI that tuition has been paid for the first year. If you also have scholarships or grants, you should also provide documentation to demonstrate this as a part of this requirement. Fourth is to provide a receipt of a GIC of 10,000 Canadian dollars. Fifth is to submit your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts. And for Quebec-bound students, you need a CAQ. For the non-SDS stream, these are the mandatory documents required for the AIP. First is to submit a valid LOA from a DLI in Canada. Second is to provide IELTS, TOEFL, or PTE test results. No online English test results will be accepted. Third is to show documentation that demonstrates you have in liquid funds and enough money to pay for tuition, living expenses, and transportation for the first year of school, plus an explanation and evidence of how you intend to pay for all of the remaining subsequent years of school without relying on working in Canada. Fourth is to submit your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts. And last but not the least, you need a CAQ for Quebec-bound students. Additionally, we would also recommend you to submit a letter explaining why you choose your program of study. So now moving on. Admissibility assessments are made after AIP and before visa issuance. They include assessments such as medical, criminality, and biometrics, among other things. This means that you must provide biometrics, complete your immigration medical exam, answer all questions truthfully and completely. This includes declaring all previous visa refusals for all countries, providing all of your background history for the last 10 years, and being truthful about any previous arrests and criminal history. And fourth is to submit authentic documents only. So now we'll move on to the next slide. It is important to note that the required documents to submit under SDS has not changed. We realize that due to service disruptions, you may not be able to submit all of the required documents to qualify under the stream. Examples of may be upfront medicals, IELTS results, GIC, etc. If you're unable to submit a required document, for example, upfront medicals, your application will be moved to the non-SDS stream. Moving on to the next slide. Many of you will have questions about working in Canada and how the changes may affect your opportunity to be employed. So why is the postgraduate work permit or PGWP important for many students? Work experience provides a better opportunity to gain the language skills and work experience required to apply for permanent resident status in Canada. As well, Canada has some of the highest salary for workers. Additionally, if you decide to return to your home or work in another country, people who gain Canadian work experience are often able to demonstrate that they have the skills, knowledge, and critical thinking required to do the job. It is worth noting that to obtain a 3-year postgraduate work permit, the applicant must have completed a minimum 2 years of post-secondary studies in an eligible program. You can complete more than one program and combine their length to determine your PGWP length, but in that situation, each program has to be PGWP eligible, including being at least 8 months in length. So in the next slide, it applies to the students who are already in Canada. Essentially, if a student switched to part-time studies or had to take a break in studies, for example, the spring-summer semester may have been cancelled due to the pandemic, they may still continue to work on and off campus, provided that they were previously a full-time student and already authorized to work on or off campus pre-pandemic. For off-campus work, the maximum limit is still 20 hours per week during the academic session and full-time during regular academic breaks. For students who are in essential services, this could include jobs in the health sector, for example, they can work more than 20 hours per week up till August 31st. To qualify for this, they need a valid study permit, must currently be in an academic session, authorized to work on or off campus, and must be working in an essential job. For those who are not yet in Canada, a common question we are asked is if you can go to Canada and work those maximum 20 hours per week while taking online classes for the fall semester. The short answer to this is no. I would like to remind you of what we discussed in the earlier slides regarding what students need to demonstrate in order to travel to Canada. Unless your physical presence is required for your studies in the fall semester, it is not essential for you to travel to Canada at this time. Additionally, only students with visas issued on or before March 18 can travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. So now we'll move on to the next slide. We have heard your concerns about having to pause mid-studies for one-year program, so you do not exceed the maximum allowable time on online studies outside of Canada in order for the entire program to count towards your PGWP. We are pleased to introduce new measures to address this. Here are the latest changes. If you are unable to travel to Canada at this time due to travel restrictions, your eligible online studies will count towards your PGWP if you already have a study permit, or you have been approved for a study permit, or you will apply for a study permit before beginning of your program of studies in January 2021. If you fall in any of the situations listed above, you can complete up to 100% of your program online while outside of Canada if your program is between 8 and 12 months in length and you started your program of study between May and September 2020. This essentially means that taking an entire one-year program online outside of Canada may qualify the entire program for a PGWP. You can complete up to 50% of your program online up until April 30, 2021, while outside Canada, if you also eventually complete at least 50% of your program in Canada. Additionally, you can complete up to 50% of your program online up until April 30, 2021, while outside Canada, if Number one, you graduate from two different programs within 2 years of each other, and each program is at least 8 months in length, and at least one of the programs started between May and September 2020, and at least 50% of the combined program is completed in Canada. This means that you could potentially complete a 1-year program outside of Canada and then take another 1-year program in Canada, and both programs will give you the maximum allowable time towards your PGWP. So moving on to the next slide. If you decide to study and work in Canada, you may then decide to make Canada your permanent home. To begin the process of applying for permanent residence in Canada, you must submit your profile in the Express Entry online system. This will show you how many comprehensive ranking system points you have based on your education, work experience, language ability, and other factors. On a regular basis, IRCC invites the candidates with the most points in the Express Entry pool to apply for permanent residence through one of the federal economic immigration programs. If you are invited to apply for the permanent residence, your invitation will tell you which program you need to apply through, and you will have 60 days to submit your application. There are other options for applying to immigrate permanently as a worker outside of the Express Entry system. Some examples include the Provincial Nominee Program at the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. So in the next slide, we will look at the conditions by which you must abide before air travel to Canada. The airline will require the following documents from you. Number one is your passport. Number two is a valid study permit or a port of entry letter of introduction issued on or before March 18. And number three are documents to demonstrate that your travel to Canada is essential. Failure to provide any of these documents may result in your being denied boarding. Additionally, you will be required to pass a health check performed by airline officials just before your flight. If you're showing any COVID-19 symptoms, you may also be denied boarding. If you are approved for boarding, note that you must wear a non-medical mask or face covering upon arrival in Canada. Moving on. All travelers must undergo a health check upon arrival in Canada. It is also mandatory that all passengers arriving in Canada must self-quarantine for 14 days. This means that all travelers must, number one, have a plan to self-quarantine for 14 days. Number two, confirm and provide evidence that they have a suitable place to quarantine. This means providing an address and explaining how they intend to self-quarantine if other people live at the same location. Number three is to explain how you intend to respect that quarantine plan. For example, explain how you intend to receive essential items such as food. Please do not travel to Canada unless you have a viable quarantine plan. Failure to comply has consequences, which include a fine up to 750,000 Canadian dollars, 6 months in prison, or being deemed inadmissible, removed from Canada, and being banned from entering Canada for 1 year. Moving on, in this section, we want to inform you of various fraud activities and misinformation related to immigration applications. You may also scan the QR code on the screen as I speak. First, it is important to protect yourself. We always say that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You should never share your personal information with unauthorized agents. You should also never believe any claims guaranteeing you a visa. Each application is assessed on its own merit by a migration officer. Then there are fraudulent websites and scams. Websites and social media accounts may claim to be from the Government of Canada. Applicants are tricked into transferring money for services that will never be provided to them. Our official website is www.canada.ca/immigration. Then there are email scams. Please note that IRCC will never send you an email from a personal address like Hotmail or Gmail. IRCC addresses always end in .gc, .ca, or canada.ca. Then there are telephone scams. Please note that IRCC will never ask you for any sort of payment by telephone. Coming on to unauthorized agents. Examples of unauthorized agents include, examples of authorized agents include members of law societies in Canada, members of Chambers des Notaires in Quebec, and members of ICCRC, which is a regulatory body for immigration consultants in Canada. You do not have to use an agent to submit your application, but if you choose to use one, please make sure that they are legally authorized to represent you. Please visit our website for more information on this. With respect to agents, we understand that many schools use education agents to recruit students. This is perfectly acceptable as long as their activities are restricted to recruitment. This means that they should not be providing any immigration services or advice unless they are also an authorized agent. Moving on to the next slide. So on this slide, you can see more information on different ways to connect with us and find out more information. You can find the link to the website of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenships Canada. You can also find the link to the website of the High Commission of Canada in India. You can find the links to the Facebook and Twitter handles by the name of Canada and India, where you can get all the latest updates. And you can also follow our YouTube channel, where we have included many videos on fraud and other important information. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. I would now request Jaquie to take on to some of the questions which we get pretty often from students. Jaquie, over to you.
Should I quickly do a poll, do you think, before we start taking questions?
Most
sure, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. So everyone, I know, thank you for listening in. We can see there a lot of questions have come in. Thank you, Shikhir, for that very detailed presentation. So here's what we want to ask you. What are you now most interested in hearing about? So we've given you a couple of options. Please share what you would like us to speak about. Okay, so we have travel restrictions, processing times, AIP, language tests, deferring studies, and the postgraduate work permit. We're going to give you a few more seconds to answer before I share the results. Okay, let me end that. Okay, here we go. So we have, processing times and travel restrictions are the two top items that everyone wants to hear a little bit more about, followed by the AIP, and then of course deferring studies and the work permit. So over to you, Jaquie.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Maple Assist, for inviting us to talk to you today. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I think we can hear you.
Okay,
yeah,
good. So this is really unprecedented times, and changes happen very quickly. So I just want to stress that the information that we are providing today is valid for today. As you know, even as short as a couple days ago, we received new information regarding the postgraduate work permit. So we really strongly encourage you to follow us on our Facebook, as well as updates on our website, to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information. We know that this is a difficult year, and that a lot of people had plans to study in Canada and had their programs picked out, and it's disappointing. We are trying to balance the pandemic with the fact that we understand the significant financial and cultural contribution that students bring to Canada. So with that, I'm just going to go through some of the questions that we've really been getting a lot of, because it seems that during this time, that's why we're doing a lot of outreach right now, is to try and answer many of your questions, because this is so different from other years. So the first one is regarding essential travel, which is obviously something people are very interested in. How do I demonstrate that my travel to Canada is essential if I've never lived in Canada? You should consult with your designated learning institution to determine your entry into Canada is essential. If your entry to Canada is essential, the institution should provide you with a letter clearly outlining why you must be in Canada. IRCC does not provide authorization letters for students. So I am a student in Canada who traveled to India in March. I was not able to get a return flight after the lockdown took place. Can I travel to Canada now? Yes. An essential reason for traveling to Canada is if you were previously living to Canada and you were returning to your current home. But that doesn't mean that you can just go to the airline or Canada Border Services officer and say, oh, I lived in Canada before. Everything will require documentation and evidence. So if you have a lease agreement, if you have stamps on your passport showing that you had entered Canada, that's the type of evidence that the airline will be requiring. Another question that we get most often is, my Wi-Fi is not reliable, so can I enter Canada to study? So every student situation is unique. It's very important for you to consult with your designated learning institution regarding options for studying online. If your bandwidth is not suitable, you should look at different options such as upgrading your Wi-Fi. So it won't simply be my Wi-Fi isn't strong enough. It has to have a detailed explanation regarding what steps you took and how the designated learning institution tried to handle your specific situation in order to ensure that you could study outside of Canada. So it's really looking at what makes it essential. It's not a nice to have, it is essential travel. So what if my DLI does not provide online courses and requires me to be in Canada, but I've received my approval after March 18th, 2020? You will not be able to travel under the current travel restrictions. If your DLI requires you to be in Canada, you should consider deferring your studies. Can I still go to Canada and work 20 hours a week off campus if my classes are online? No. If your classes are online, you would not have an essential reason for traveling to Canada. Another question that we receive is, can I work in India? Yes, you can work in India. If you are able to study full-time and work, absolutely, you can do that. Of course, we would strongly encourage you to concentrate on your studies, though. I was allowed to board. I was not allowed to board at the aircraft leaving for Canada, even though I had a valid study permit issued before March 19th. What should I do? The final determination allowing a traveler to board an aircraft is made by the airline. Often this is in consultation with Canada Border Services Agency. It is your responsibility to have documentation that clearly shows that your travel to Canada is essential. So that, I'm hoping, will provide a little bit more context regarding essential travel. We're going to go on to the two-stage assessment process. So what documents must I submit before September 15th to be eligible for two-stage processing? There are 3 mandatory documents you must submit, and that's the completion of your IRCC application form, proof that your fees have been paid for your application and your biometric fees, and the letter of acceptance from your designated learning institution. You should also, you should also submit as many required supporting documents as possible at the same time as your application submission to avoid delays. Is this two-stage processing available for winter 2021 start dates? No, stage 2 processing will only be for programs that start or have started in spring, summer, or fall 2020. How do I obtain approval in principle? Is this the first stage of approval? Approval in principle is the first stage of approval, and it's when the officer reviews your application to be satisfied that you are eligible and that you will abide by the terms and conditions of your study permit and leave Canada after your authorized stay. And Shikhir had gone through what types of things the officer is looking for to determine your eligibility. What does an officer consider when reviewing an application to grant approval in principle? The officer weighs several factors, including your level of establishment. An example would be stable employment with a good salary. Does your course of studies make sense? This is very important, and I think it's sometimes overlooked by students. The letter that you provide us, we do read it. We do want to understand why you chose that course of studies. If it doesn't make sense to us, then we question the credibility of the application. So be truthful in that. If it is because this is a course of studies that will allow you to obtain a postgraduate work permit, your ultimate goal is to immigrate to Canada, say that. Say how you came up with that plan. Don't just say, oh, I plan to come back and go and run my family business, and yet your studies has nothing to do with your family business. It just won't make sense. Do you have sufficient language skills to show you are able to succeed in your studies in Canada? This is important. I know that people have asked us that IRCC has indicated that language requirements are not required for SDS applications. This is true, but only in the context of where you are living in a primarily English-speaking environment. So we strongly suggest, in fact, we would consider it to be essential, that you submit your language test scores. That would allow the officer to be able to assess whether or not you have the language requirements to succeed in your studies in Canada. Do you have sufficient funds for your studies and your living expenses without relying on working in Canada? And do you have a valid letter of acceptance from the DLI? The next question is, if I'm missing a document like medicals, can I still qualify for SDS? No. If you are not able to submit all the documents under SDS, the officer will assess your application as a regular non-SDS application. What do I do if I cannot submit a document within the requested timeframes? IRCC will not refuse an application for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents on time. However, please submit the requested documents as soon as you are able. If the deadline for submission elapses, that is okay. We will continue to hold your application, but it's in your best interest to get those documents to us as soon as possible. How will I know if AIP is granted? A letter confirming your stage 1 approval will be sent to you on your online account. We are getting some questions regarding, is this letter genuine? You should know by logging into your online account, because that's where you should see your letter indicating your approval. If you do not have an online account, we suggest that you connect and create one. If you have provided your email address in your application, your visa application submitted through the VAC, the Visa Application Center, if you have that email address, we will send all emails correspondence through that email address. If you have put it to an unauthorized representative, that unauthorized representative will get all of the information. If I'm granted AIP, can I assume that once I complete my biometrics and medicals, I will get a student visa? No. Approval in principle is not the same as being granted a visa. The officer will still need to establish that you meet admissibility requirements. Note that a stage 2 refusal is uncommon, provided that you are truthful in your application, that you have not provided any fraudulent documents, and that you comply with any additional requests immediately. I want to further explain, because some of the questions that we've been getting in other webinars are, if I have a mild case of hypertension or diabetes, will that make me inadmissible to Canada? The two inadmissibility grounds for Canada are, do you pose a threat to the health and safety of Canadians? So something contagious like the Ebola virus. The second piece is, do you have a disease or disorder that would be excessive demand on our health or social systems. So something like you have to undergo chemotherapy for your cancer treatment, something that is excessive would deem you inadmissible to Canada. Hopefully that provides a little bit more clarification. The other thing that I want to state is for this cohort, the student cohort, we don't get a lot of people that have criminality or security concerns. So really the big thing is not submitting any documents that aren't authentic and answering the questions truthfully. If you've been previously refused a visa for Canada, any other country, if you've been deported, anything like that, you must declare it on your application. You must be truthful. The second piece is if you have things like TB, which can happen in India, the panel physician will give you a regimen in which you need to follow. If you don't follow that regimen, it's not necessarily that you will be refused for medical reasons, but you will be refused for non-compliance because you did not comply with the medical instructions. When will my stage 2 admissibility decision be completed? Your stage 2 admissibility decision will be assessed after your approval in principle and before visa issuance. This includes an assessment of your medical, biometric, as well as your security and criminal background questions. If your application contains documents that include information on your stage 2 processing, at this point we are focusing on stage 1 approval in principle. We have a large number of student applications that we are trying to get through before the start of this fall semester. Therefore, at this point in time, expect only approval in principle. The other thing is with the VACs being closed in India, it's not a significant pressure for us because we know you are not able to get your visa at this time anyway. So we would rather focus on getting that first decision to you as soon as possible. What requirements need to be completed to receive stage 2? You need to have your biometrics. You've completed your medical exam, and let me stress again, answer truthfully all of your questions on your application. What if my school starts prior to me receiving my stage 1 AIP? You can start school online prior to obtaining your AIP. If you receive your AIP after you started school, all the time will count towards your postgraduate work permit, provided that you submitted your study permit application before September 15th. I know I've been seeing in some of the chats, people have a question regarding the fact that their school not allow them to start without approval in principle. I'm not clear why an institution would do that, especially with the way that we're saying that once you receive your approval in principle, you will, all this time will count towards your postgraduate work permit. A lot of people can study and never want to enter the country. So I think that you could raise that with your designated learning institution and say, I want to study maybe completely online and get my education in Canada because I value a Canadian education and I don't necessarily have to enter Canada, which is now completely available, considering that you could potentially study online for 1 year and your program might be 1 year. So I think I would go back to your designated learning institution. They might just be a little bit shy of having somebody enter that doesn't have the immigration stamp. I think maybe we've drilled that into them. Make sure that the person has their study permit, and maybe it's taking them some time to think, think about the new world and the new two-step process. Will I receive a refund of my tuition fees if my application is refused when I'm studying online in India with a DLI in Canada? Again, you need to consult your DLI. We cannot give you that answer, and different DLIs will have different refund policies. So now another huge topic of concern is processing times. So the first question I'm going to try and answer is processing for SDS study permit application faster than non-SDS applications? So there are many service disruptions due to COVID-19 pandemic. and we have not been able to maintain our service standard and our processing times. We are working through inventory of applications now. We will not refuse any application for non-compliance or failure to submit the required documents at this time. However, if you're not able to submit requested documents in a timely manner, we will not be able to complete your processing of your application until all required and requested documents have been received. So we're not necessarily, we're prioritizing all the cases where we can give approval in principle. So that's what I would stress. It's not necessarily SDS versus non-SDS. We still strongly encourage people to go through the SDS program. It has a higher rate of approval because of the fact that it can be much clearer for the officer that you clearly meet language requirements, you have your GIC, you have your tuition paid for. So still consider applying through SDS. When can I expect a decision on my application? There have been many service disruptions, and so our processing times are no longer accurate. When can I submit my passport so that I can get my visa? Please wait for the visa application centers to reopen to submit your passport for visa issuance. The High Commission of Canada does not accept passports directly, and if you send your passport to the High Commission, we will return it to you. I'm just going to briefly cover language test because this is a question that we received most often, is regarding PTE. Does IRCC accept PTE language scores as proof of language ability for study permit applications? It is recommended that you submit the language courses indicated on IRCC website. However, if you have completed PTE language test, you may submit your scores to the IRCC using the PTE portal. So if you go into the PTE website and click on the portal, there's a way for you to send it to us, IRCC, so that we can access it. Please do not send your name and password in your study permit application, but do indicate in your application that you have completed PTE and that you have sent it to IRCC for them to view. What if my IELTS score is expiring or about to expire? So your IELTS score should have been valid on the date that you submitted your application to us. However, if it has already expired, we will accept that score. And just to reiterate that no IRCC does not accept results from online language tests. It is exploring different ways, considering the pandemic, where we could accept online language scores, but there can be a lot of fraud in people taking language testing for other people. So at this time, the language testing remains the same, and that's to complete IELTS or TEF or TCF for French. I think those are primarily the main questions that we've been seeing. So I'm going to turn it over to Shikhir because he's been monitoring all the 237 questions now to see if there's something that I can provide more clarity on.
Hi, Jaquie. I think we've addressed pretty much the concerns of the participants. I think we have about 2 or 3 questions which you may want to answer. So the first question is that my program is completely online, but I still want to travel to Canada. Is it possible? For that, I have a valid study permit and a visa issued before March 18th.
So the short answer is no. You have to have an essential reason for going to Canada. Wanting to go to Canada, having a want versus a need is very different. So what is you might want to go to Canada, but at this time, due to the pandemic, it is only those that have essential reason for being in Canada.
Right, so the next question is that when will IRCC start giving second stage visa results?
Well, as I stated, we are prioritizing approval in principle right now. So we are trying to get through as many of those as we can. And then after we've completed that, we'll move on to stage 2 processing. Again, it's not a priority for us given the visa application centers are not open. It's more important that we get as many approval in principle so that students have that security that they're going to get a study permit and be able to eventually enter Canada, provided that there's no admissibility concerns.
Right, so Jaquie, I think we can take one more question. The participant says that I received a call from the embassy yesterday and they asked me many questions. She also says that I have no objection to the same, but I had heard that an embassy never calls any student for visa or for any clarification to enter Canada.
I would say that it does happen where we will see clarification at times, but it is not usual. So if somebody is calling you and indicating they are from the embassy, first what I would do is say, do you have my file number? Do you know my date of birth? Do you know which college that I'm studying at? No different than somebody calls you and says, we're checking on your credit information. You want to know, okay, what do you know about me, to make sure that that person is actually calling for those reasons. I know when I've called people and they're quite surprised that they're getting a call from the visa officer and they question me as far as, what do you know about me? I have no trouble answering them. I'm like, good on you. You've asked the right questions. You passed. So don't feel that by challenging the immigration officer, that's going to do a disservice to your application. We encourage that. We don't like people or students getting taken advantage of and by fraudsters. So do your due diligence and ask those questions.
Thanks, Jaquie. I think the rest of the questions are mainly with, in relation to processing times and their eligibility to enter Canada, which you've already addressed. So I would hand it over to Anam now.
Sure. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Jaquie. I think you've covered quite a bit in those, the Q&As that you've picked up. You know, and everyone listening in, if, you know, you still feel that there's something that you need answered, please feel free to share your questions with us. We will send out, you know, a survey right after this webinar gets over. You can share your questions there. Anyone who happened to miss a part of this webinar and the presentation shared by Shikhir, you can catch it on Facebook. We'll also be sharing it on our YouTube channel soon, and we'll share it with all attendees in a day or two. So, you know, if you missed out anything, you'll be able to check it out over there. And yes, again, thank you so much, Jaquie, for joining us so early in the morning. And thank you, Shikhir, you know, for sharing all this important information with our students and followers. And you know, this has been really great. And I hope all of you have benefited from listening in. And so, you know, until next time, thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. And, you know, take care, stay safe, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you, Shikhir and Jaquie, once again.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Anam. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.